Thank you for joining us for Summa Silver's investor webinar today. Summa recently listed to the Venture Exchange with the ticker SSVR and is OTC listed as well with the ticker SSVRF. Joining me is Galen McNamara, who is the CEO of Summa Silver and the winner of last week's Silver Battle Pitch Contest. So Galen competed against 10 other silver issuers for a 5-minute quick pitch, and Summa was chosen as the winner with the best pitch last week. So congratulations on that. Galen will take us through the presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer period. So questions can be inputted into the Q&A box below or emailed to tina@adcap.ca. Just before we begin, I'll note that the presentation may contain some forward-looking statements, so I encourage you to view the disclaimers in the presentation. So with that, Galen, thanks for joining us, and congratulations again on winning the Silver Battle. I'll let you get into the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Tina, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, last week was a great week, and it was really nice for us to be part of the Silver Pitch Battle. Great companies producing, and great companies presenting, I should say, excuse me. And of course, now it's really nice to be joining you for the Silver Week. So I will do my normal presentation, but because we've got a bit more time today, that kind of lets me get into some of the more interesting details on the project, but also on the history of the area. So I'm looking forward to presenting those things because I don't really get to talk about them too much, but it's certainly something I'm very passionate about. So just to get started, Summa Silver, it's almost a brand new silver and gold focused exploration and development company with projects in the US. Co-founded this company almost a year ago now, and since then have done 2 financings, and we're about to close the 3rd one imminently, and have really just been diligently exploring away on 2 projects in the southwestern US. So before I really get into the nuts and bolts here, I like to start by just going over the exploration thesis, really my investment thesis. I've always been interested in the southwestern US. I've always been interested in these districts that are historic and famous past producers because many of them haven't really seen any modern exploration. That's number one. And then number 2, when I was first putting this deal together, I thought to myself, okay, well, if we're going to option these properties and really get into this, what are some examples of some wins in the market? And, I kept coming back to a company like Silvercrest that went into one of these historic districts in Mexico, similar numbers in terms of past production, executed on all fronts, and things went very well on the exploration side. But you fast forward 5 years and they're at, a $1.5 billion market cap company. So I just thought to myself, those are the types of chances I want to take. Those are the types of risks I want to take. And here we are today and really doing our best to continue with some very high grade results and some very good early success that we've had on our first project. So the people involved, myself, my name is Galen McNamara. I'm a geologist going back about 15 years. Before putting together Summa, I really spent 2 years looking for that deal, looking for that property that I could really kind of put say years of my life into, building into a winner for myself and my shareholders. That was, a time when we were in the barest of bear markets. So I really had an opportunity to sift through, a good couple hundred projects. And this one in Nevada that I'm about to introduce was the one that I really came to and liked the most for the reasons I was discussing. So before doing that, I was managing all of the drilling for Next Gen Energy, of course, high-grade uranium discoveries in the Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan. And then before that, I was working at the CB mine for Claude Resources, and we made a good discovery there that's now in production. That's me. My CFO, Martin Bajik, helped me put this deal together from the start, is an expert on structuring early stage companies. Garrett Ainsworth is a technical advisor on this. We worked very closely together at NextGen. He was actually my boss. So he's a technical advisor on this one, Summa Silver, and then I'm a technical advisor on his company, District Metals. Senior geologist, Chris Leslie. Chris is just finishing up his PhD at Codes in Tasmania. And that's, top 3 exploration focused universities in the world. But before that, he was working in BC, and he's one of the co-discoverers of the Blackwater deposit. So right now, that's 8.2 million ounces of gold in the proven and probable categories. Directors. Mike Conard, of course, is the co-founder and CEO of Vizsla Resources, which, if you don't know about it, is a very successful Mexican-focused silver exploration company. Brian Gause is our man on the ground in Nevada. He's a geologist, but also has a consulting firm. So his company helps us execute our programs in the field in the U.S. because, of course, it's very difficult for us in Canada to be traveling back and forth right now. And then finally, Thomas O'Neill is an independent director. He's in the insurance business here in Vancouver. So the capital structure of the company, what we're looking at now is 51 million shares outstanding, 59 million fully diluted, but we're just closing up our financing right now for 10 million shares at $1. So really what the numbers will be as of probably tomorrow will be 61 million shares outstanding, 69 million fully diluted, and then instead of between 4 and 5 in the bank, it'll be between 14 and 15 in the bank. So we'll be very, very well positioned to be very aggressive on the exploration and then I'll say the discovery front in 2021. Of course, the very nice thing about being an early stage company is that, you know, our shareholder, number one, the structure is very tight, but number two, we have a great shareholder registry. Eric Sprott has participated in all 3 of our financings. He just came in for $2 million on the current one. But we've also got a lot of, you know, long-term focused institutions, really resource funds that are also shareholders. Okay, so just moving into the properties here. The first property is called the Hughes Property, located in Nevada, halfway between Reno and Las Vegas. And of course, Nevada is you know, every year a top 3 or a top 5 ranked jurisdiction in terms of global mining investment. Now we all know Nevada as a really, really significant gold producer. If it were a country, it would be the 4th largest gold producer in the world. But what a lot of people don't know is that Nevada was originally known as the Silver State. And that's because of these 2 historic Wild West mining districts. The first one being the Comstock Lode, and that's up by Reno. And the second one being the Tonopah district, which was known as the Queen of the Silver Camps. And that's where our property is. We've got the eastern side of the Tonopah district. Now, zooming in just a little bit more into Nevada and part of the Walker Lane, which is a very, very well known and well-endowed gold and silver belt. Our property in Tonopah is shown there in the middle, but there's a lot of other areas, districts, deposits around. The most famous one probably being Round Mountain, which in 2018, they poured the 15th million ounce of gold there. And production there goes back 100 plus years. It's now a big open pit. But some other of the districts that people may have heard of, the Goldfield district is a little ways to the south of Tonopah. That was another high grade past producer. And one that's, you know, really come back into vogue in the last several years is the Bullfrog Mining District, where you've got companies like Anglo, Coeur, Waterton, Corvus, all exploring in a relatively small area and all having some pretty good success. So now the Tonopah district, it really is, you know, a great American Western mining story. It was discovered in 1900 by a guy by the name of Jim Butler, who, as the story goes, was chasing after his runaway donkeys as he moved through the desert from one ranch to the other. And the donkey stopped on top of the vein. Now, that's one story. I think it's more likely that Butler learned of the veins from the local indigenous people, the Shoshones, because he spoke their language and they would have known, you know, about those veins probably. So it's probably another case of, you know, traditional knowledge leading to discovery. But anyways, at the end of the day, the district produced 175 million ounces of silver and 1.86 million ounces of gold at grades of about 1,260 grams per ton silver equivalent. So it's a very high grade past producer that hasn't seen any modern exploration until, you know, companies like us and companies like BlackRock showed up very recently. So this is the part of the presentation where I normally start talking more about the property, but the history of Tonopah is actually really interesting. So I've got a few kind of extra slides here next that talk about some of the people that were involved in the very earliest days of this district. But last thing on this slide, I've got two pictures here on the left of the Mizpah Hotel. One's from 1920 and one's from 2020, and the one in 2020 I took. Now you can still go there. You can still go and stay at this hotel. It's been beautifully remodeled. And when you go back in there, it's like basically stepping back in time to, you know, the early 1900s, the turn of the 20th century. And it's just very, very well done. If you're ever there, I definitely recommend going and seeing it. And right now, I think it's rated as the #1 haunted hotel in America. It's got supposedly there's ghosts in there, but I didn't see anything when I stayed there. So some of the people that were involved in this, going back in time, the first guy being Howard Hughes. Now, I've kind of just prepared some notes on these people just because to do them justice correctly. So I'm just going to read some of the notes I wrote down. So the first person being Howard Hughes. So Howard Hughes really is one-time owner of the Hughes Property, and that's why it's called the Hughes Property. It's just a tip of the cap to the history. He really was a visionary. He was a record-breaking aviator. He was a Hollywood tycoon, and he enjoyed a rich business career, basically where his efforts were really touched by his strong entrepreneurial spirit. In 1935, Hughes set the land plane's airspeed record of 352 miles per hour in an aircraft he actually commissioned and helped design himself. And the background to this slide is just him standing in front of that plane. A year and a half after that, flying the same plane, Hughes set a new transcontinental airspeed record by flying nonstop from Los Angeles to Newark in 7.5 hours. Now, we don't think about that today really as being a big deal, but back then it must have blown people's minds. And then the next one in 1938, Hughes set another record by flying around the world in under 4 days. Hughes's idea for the round-the-world flight was for it to be a triumph of American aviation technology, showing that air travel was safe. Ironically, though, Hughes personally survived 4 plane crashes, including one into Beverly Hills that nearly killed him. And that's the one that's in the movie The Aviator, if you've ever watched it. Over the years, Hughes had numerous relationships with Hollywood actresses, but in 1957, he married actress Jean Peters in Tonopah. So that was part of his connection to the area before he even owned any property here. In 1969, after recognizing the high-grade potential remaining in the mines around Tonopah, Hughes' Summa Corporation, no relation to Summa Silver, purchased many of the mining claims that now make up the Hughes property. But, the rapid demise of his health, probably due to brain injuries he sustained in his plane crashes and other, bodily injuries he sustained in his plane crashes, it's very well known that he became a recluse, and leading up to his death in 1976, because his health deteriorated quickly, it really meant that his vision for his mining interests, including in and around this area, were never realized. But he was certainly a guy that was, generally well ahead of his time in a lot of the things he did. The second guy here, Jim Butler. Now, Jim Butler was the guy who was credited with the discovery of the Tonopah silver veins in 1900. But really his story begins just before he made that discovery, when he took a number of samples as he after the donkey supposedly stopped on the veins. He took a number of samples and then took them to the local assayer in the next town over called Klondike. But the local assayer told him that the samples were worthless and threw them away without even completing the assay. On the way back to his ranch, Butler collected more rock samples and then left them on his windowsills for the next several months. Later that summer, another guy by the name of Tasker Oddie, who's next on this list, came by to see the samples, was friends with Jim Butler, and offered to have them assayed for him. So the deal was Butler offered Oddie a 1/4 interest in whatever came out of the results. When Oddie was notified of the extreme high grades of the rock samples, he sent a runner to Butler informing him of the good news. However, Butler did not move quickly. He stayed at his ranch for the next few weeks and completed a hay harvest. So the ground stayed open. Anyone could have staked it. He didn't think it was that important. He decided he wanted to stay home and finish his hay harvest before he went to stake these claims, which I think is pretty funny. It wasn't until the end of August that Butler and his wife got around to filing 8 new mining claims. Those claims would become the earliest producers in the district. Almost immediately, miners flocked to Tonopah in hopes of striking it rich. By late 1900, Butler decided that the best way to profit from his claims was to lease them out in small portions. This was a new concept in mining and was done verbally between Butler and the leasers. A key step in the development of the district, the early success of this verbal lease system, is what led to the attraction of significant outside capital for large-scale operation and large-scale development of the mines. Okay, so next here we've got Tasker Audie, another interesting individual. Tasker was trained as a lawyer in New York. He became a mining entrepreneur when he grub-staked Jim Butler and had his original Tonopah rock samples assayed. The assay was completed by a friend of Audie's who taught chemistry in Austin, Nevada. This investment gave him a 25% share in Butler's discovery of the Tonopah veins. He was later manager of the Tonopah Mining Company and then went on to form the Tonopah Belmont Development Company, which broke ground on the Belmont Mine, which is the most significant past producer on our property, and was a great corporate success. At one point in the earliest days of the camp, before any law was established, Audie hired Wyatt Earp to protect the mining claims from claim jumpers at $20 a day. This was an extravagant expense at the time, but Audie is said to have referred to the cost as some of the best money he ever spent. Audie was involved in public service for most of his working life. He was Nye County District Attorney from 1900 to 1902, a member of the Nevada State Senate from 1903 to 1906. He then went on to become governor of Nevada, and finally he was a U.S. Senator. So George Wingfield, the next guy here, another character of maybe a little not as a high reputation as the first two guys. But Wingfield arrived in Nevada at the age of 16 in 1899 as a cattle drover from Oregon. Within 5 years, he was the richest man in Nevada. After starting in Winnemucca, where he met his partner and his mentor and eventual business partner, U.S. Senator George Nixon, Wingfield arrived in the new mining camp of Tonopah in 1902 and made his living as a gambler. I think he played faro and he was a faro dealer at one point. By the end of that year, he had pyramided his card game winnings into the ownership of the Tonopah Club, a local casino, and a profit of $200,000 in cash. So $200,000 in 1900, you can imagine how many millions that would be worth today. So now he was capitalized. So him and the senator invested in mining stocks and in real estate. In 1906, the partners consolidated their holdings in stocks in the nearby Goldfield district to create Goldfield Consolidated Mines, a venture which netted them $25 million. Over the next 2 decades, Wingfield developed major interests in banking and politics. He promoted new ideas for Nevada, the biggest of which was to reinstate legal gambling, an idea that really helped permanently shape the economy of the state. In 1901, it was discovered that his bank had embezzled $500,000 in state funds. Wingfield repaid the money, but the saga resulted in his personal bankruptcy. However, by 1935, he made some astute new investments in new mining districts, and that returned him to a significant wealth, which he preserved until he passed away. Cool. Okay, the last guy I'll just talk about here is another maybe bandit is the way to describe him. So his name is George Graham Rice. In 1901, at the age of 30 and fresh out of prison for check forging, Jacob Herzig changed his name to George Graham Rice and began a horse race tipping service in New York. Within 2 years, the venture made him over $1 million, but he gambled the profits away. Broke and run out of town by the post office department for suspected mail fraud, Rice moved to Nevada in 1904. First arriving in Tonopah with $150 and then settling in nearby Goldfield, Rice began a successful advertising and stock brokerage business to promote and sell stocks of mining companies that he had ownership stakes in. Relatively quickly, all of his promoted stocks turned out to be worthless, and the mining properties showed only small amounts of gold and silver. In 1906, Rice co-sponsored a boxing match in Goldfield between a guy by the name of Joe Gans and another guy, Battling Nelson, which is said to have been the longest boxing match in history, lasting 42 rounds. Like Rice's many stock promotions, the match ended in suspicious circumstances. Nevertheless, he was a millionaire once more, but he again lost his fortune. This time it was the result of overexposure to the stock market in a bubble and poor investments. Worse, he was now squarely in the crosshairs of the federal authorities for his failed stock promotions and practices of soliciting investments through the mail. Rice blamed his legal problems in part on a public feud with the more powerful and better financed George Wingfield. At the end of the day, in all, he served 4 sentences in federal penitentiaries in Georgia and New York after convictions for mail fraud and forgery. So that's just a little bit of the checkered history of some of the people that helped build the area and helped build Nevada, really. Okay, so coming back to the property now, the Hughes property, and again, calling it the Hughes property is the tip of the cap to the former owner, Howard Hughes. Really was one of America's great silver producers of the time. The Belmont Mine, which was the main past producing asset on this property, produced something like 40 million ounces of silver and 400,000 ounces of gold at grades of about 1,250 grams per ton silver equivalent. But again, no real assessment of what could be remaining in the mine until now. It was never drilled until we drilled it this last year, and nobody really put anything back together in 3D just to see what could be left in this mine in terms of unmined veins, unmined extensions, unexplored areas in it. What could be left, nobody knew. We spent a lot of time coming up with targets and building those targets and doing the geological legwork to see what we could have on our hands, and just at the end of last year, finished a 29-hole program. We've got results for 15 of those holes so far, so there's still 14 pending. But I've encountered just some ultra-high grades in some of these extensions around this old mine. With the highlights being here, 3,760 grams per ton silver equivalent over 2.5 meters. And then another hole, 6,220 grams per ton silver equivalent over 0.7 meters. But really, though, we're looking at multiple zones over a strike length of about 3.5 kilometers, where we're seeing grades exceeding 1,000 grams per ton on a silver equivalent basis. So that's very, very high grade. The land position now, here's the town of Tonopah on the bottom left side of this map. The historic part of the district is what I'm circling here is basically, all of these symbols on here that are squares, those are old mine shafts. So out in this area is really the historic part of the district. The rest of the property has more of an exploration flavor to it, but I'm going to get into the details on that as well. So zooming in a little bit more, the Belmont Mine really was one of America's great silver producers, and there's some information on the mine on the left side of this slide. But what I like to concentrate on here is the right side of this slide. So production didn't stop here because they ran out of ore, because the mine ran out of ore. It stopped for two reasons. In the 1920s, silver and gold prices collapsed, number one. And then number two, the veins ran into a fault zone called the Halifax Fault. And the old-time miners more or less lost them on the other side of that fault, except for a few really interesting sniffs that we followed up on. So there's two questions left here. Number one is, how much mineralization is left in the mine or in and around the mine? And then number two, how much is there to discover on the far side of that fault? So those are really two questions that we're figuring out right now. So here's a summary of the drill results we've been able to release so far. And like I was saying, this is 15 of 29 holes. And yeah, we've got strong mineralization over a strike length of 3.5 kilometers. I won't, reread all the numbers here, but what I just want to point out is that, this is the old part of the district, the historic part of the district. So going east from there, we were targeting exploration mineralization on the far side of that Halifax Fault at the Mizpah extension target here and the Ruby target here, and drilled 3 holes. And hey, 2 of those holes hit strong mineralization. So it's pretty hard for me to kind of understate, how important I think that is, and that this is right beside a world-class district. We like what we're seeing in and around the mines. We're hitting great grades in and around the mines, but we're also hitting great grades when we step out and explore. Now it's deeper out there in the Ruby target in that it's 500 meters down or so. But if we can tag on to another, Tonopah system, the extension of the Tonopah system, and I think we're beginning to do that, the reward could be very, very significant. Looking at just some of the drill results around the old Belmont mine, so back in where the old mines were. This is just a longitudinal section, or a side view, really, where those pierce points show where the holes went through the vein in question. We've got some very strong results in hole 20 and hole 6. Those are the results I quoted. Still 3 holes pending from that area. But also the thing that's interesting about this is that there's a lot of open space around where we know the veins are that just hasn't been explored yet. So I think there's a lot of work to do in this area as well. And here, just a photo of hole 20. That's a quartz vein. And when it gets really high grade, the quartz gets very dark colored, fine grained silver sulfides. excuse me, and then very heavy. So the guys were pretty excited when they saw this vein, because they were fairly confident that it was gonna be good, and it was. Now just looking at another part of the property, the Murray vein on the western side of the property. Again, here we've got results for 4 holes. There's still 3 pending. And this is an area that, is fairly broadly mineralized, and we need to drill at a regular spacing to maybe look for a resource. And I think what we need to do is probably space the holes at 50 meters apart. Now they're spaced a little more than that in general, but we know that this is broadly mineralized, so it's just a matter of following up and drilling the holes that we need to drill. Okay, so that's Tonopah, and just lastly on this, in terms of technically, before I switch and show some maps. So Tonopah, how does it compare to some of the famous, say, Mexican districts that the Spanish have mined going back 500 years? And I think if you take Tonopah, and it's got 4 kilometers of strike length and those amount of ounces produced. Well, you compare that to the Guanajuatos or the San Dimas or Pachuca, they've got a lot more strike length and a lot more ounces produced. I'm just showing that here on the bottom part of this slide with the white bars. So if we take Tonopah, and the 4 kilometers is represented by that white bar, add a 1.3 kilometers, which represents the discovery at Ruby, and then add even more to that, because it continues to be open to the east. It's like, well, if those types of numbers, those types of extensions fit in quite well with how big these districts can get when they get to be truly world-class, like in Mexico. And there's really nothing stopping that from happening here at all. And our goal is to try to figure that out, and really make that kind of big swing discovery. This is what the property looks like on the field, and I think I took these photos last time I was there, which was about a year ago. Great road access. You've got US Highway 6 crossing the property, and it's just typical kind of Mojave desert-like terrain. Easy access, easy to get around. The option terms on the property. It's a 5-year option to own 100%, with cash payments of $400,000 in US, share payments of $400,000 in US, and then a $1.5 million work commitment, which is now complete. Okay, so that's the Hughes property. So I'm just going to switch and share some maps. Okay, 1 second here. Okay, so this is a satellite image of the property with the property boundary just in a black outline here. I'm just going to zoom in on a few things that I think are interesting. So the first one being, we're going to zoom in here, and this is a colloquial way I say it's a donut hole in the property that I'm just circling right now. And this is where the veins outcrop. So this is where Jim Butler made his original discovery. In the 90s, it used to be part of the property, but in the 90s it was donated by Kinross to the town of Tonopah, and they turned it into a historic mining park and mining museum. It's a tourist attraction now. So when you go there, you can go and take a great tour. There's a guy that'll drive you around in a side-by-side ATV and point out all the history, and it's really very good. So you can see here, if you zoom way in, there's these parallel lines. Those are actually open stopes. So those go down 500 feet, and you really would not want to be picking around there and maybe fall down one. And I think that was part of why it was donated. This area was donated to the town because the mining company that owned it at the time probably would have been very, very worried about liability. But anyways, what this shows here is you can see these stopes. They generally go east-west. Moving to the east, they dive underground. And here's the Belmont Mine is just in here. The Halifax Fault, and then you get into the east and it's more exploration territory. But really here, if we zoom out, what's interesting is that, and I've walked this ground, is that there's some very, very, very strong alteration at surface. And that's just geologic code word for smoke. So when we zoom in on this green area, again, that's what we call propolitic alteration, not to get too technical. But it really is telling us that, there's lots going on out there. And you can see there's all these old test trenches that, the old timers were really just looking for extensions of those. There's a couple of mining shafts there that we just don't really understand yet. So that's one area. And then another area, I'm just panning here to the east. is in here. And this one was just astoundingly altered at surface with clays and pyrite. That little dot there is an old mine shaft. Very, very dangerous looking. I threw a rock down it and I think it might be 100 feet deep or something like that. Don't have any information, but I mean, you don't dig that hole without there being a reason, you know, without there being some sign. So one of these are the things that we're following up on, in that if I zoom back out, you know, you've got the, you know, one of the best mining districts in the US in here, you know, was cut off by a fault. Nobody ever looked on the other side of that fault. And hey, on the other side of that fault, you've got some very, very strong alteration at surface that's never really had a serious look at ever. So that's one of the things that, you know, our team is concentrating pretty hard on, is trying to find, you know, something that could be similar to Tonopah. One of the things that we did just in the fall was we flew a magnetic survey from a drone, and got the results for that, and it's pretty interesting. I'm just going to turn them on and walk you through a little bit of the thinking behind our exploration targeting. So here's the mag signature, and yeah, it looks a lot like kind of, you know, a mix up of a bunch of different colors. The purples are high, and to keep it very simple, the blues are low. But from this, we can determine and interpret a bunch of different things, especially faults. So I'm going to check on some faults that Chris actually interpreted, and I'm going to check off the mag again here just to keep things simple. So when you look at these, and these are the faults that we think are there, and we're going to go and verify them in the field via mapping. But you've got, when you zoom into something like that, you know, you've got a strong fault right around, some strong alteration, excuse me, right around the confluence of faults, you know, so that's something that's very, very attractive. Another thing is that if you look at the Halifax fault, and this is where the fault that the old timers, where the veins ran into, and the old timers lost them on the other side of that. But if you look at that Halifax fault, it's got about, you know, at least 40 or 50 million ounces of silver, you know, slammed up right against it on this side of it that we know of. You know, I like to look for patterns and keep things really simple. And I see other similar faults, you know, going to the east. And we have drill holes out here that are very, very altered that we drilled. And there's a similar fault there. I start to think to myself, well, is this fault also hosting the same amount of silver? You know, are these north-south oriented faults? Are they somehow helping to localize silver mineralization? And those are the questions that, you know, we're really thinking hard about and really trying to answer. Last thing on the Tonopah property before I switch to New Mexico, I'm going to check this off now. One thing I don't really talk too much about, but I think is more and more important in a rising silver price environment. It's something that we've internally been thinking about very hard. So this beach-like looking structure here is actually mine tailings. So that's sandy tailings going back to the Belmont Mine, going back 100 years. And there's quite a bit of, you know, remaining silver and gold in those tailings. The tailings, when Howard Hughes owned the property, the tailings were actually what his team concentrated on reprocessing. So if you just think to ourselves, you know, like, okay, well, the Belmont Mine produced 40 million ounces of silver and 400,000 ounces of gold. You know, their recoveries were probably pretty good, and then in the mid to high 90s. But nonetheless, I mean, our work and Howard Hughes's guys' work, you know, what they figured out, and they drilled a bunch of auger holes into this, and we're in the process of, we've done the same and are in the process of analyzing the results. There's definitely a lot left, and it might be between 3 and 4 million silver equivalent ounces at a grade of, you know, maybe 70 to 80 grams per ton, just sitting there at surface, you know, as sand. So I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do the math on that, what that might be worth. So we're looking at ways to potentially reprocess that. And really big picture, something that would be really fun for us, and I think really interesting to me, is that if we could find a way to reprocess it and then maybe start minting our own coins and little silver bars in Tonopah, maybe call it the Tonopah Mint. Because if you look at the premium that physical is getting over spot nowadays, it's significant. I think I was ordering silver coins over the weekend and the weekend before, and I was paying a premium of something like 20 or 30% over spot. So anyways, I'm getting a little bit into the weeds, but at the end of the day, you know, reprocessing tailings could be a great way to non-dilutive finance the company. Okay. So that's Tonopah. That's the Hughes property in Tonopah. Now, going back to my corporate presentation, the second property is called the Mogollon property in New Mexico. And this one was named after one of the old Spanish governors of New Mexico, I believe. Ever since we started Summa, I was really looking for a second project, something that could really double our chances at making a big discovery. And like I was saying, I always like the southwestern US. I always like these old mining districts that hadn't seen the light of day. So this was a really good fit. Okay, so the Mogollon property, this one produced between the 1880s and 1942. And it really only shut down in 1942 because that's when the US entered World War II. And that's when all silver and gold mining in the US stopped by law. So between then and say the 1970s and the 1980s, it never really got much attention in the mainstream at all, or even in the exploration community, except for a little bit. But in the 80s, it was acquired by a famous geologist from Nevada who had been very successful in the Carlin district and had made some of the earliest Carlin deposits. His name was John Livermore. And he was very, very bullish on this prospect. So he actually drilled it himself, and he paid for the drilling out of his pocket. And he got some really interesting results. So right around the consolidated mine, 14 meters at almost 600 grams per ton silver equivalent. Also to the south at Clifton, 2.3 meters and almost 2,000 grams per ton silver equivalent. And a few other interesting kicks at other parts in the property at around some of these old mines. But really what this kind of gives us, it gives us a head start in that it kind of gives us an understanding of, say, between 1 and 2 kilometers of the total vein on the property. But at the end of the day, there's 34 kilometers of strike length of vein and structure on the property. And the rest of that, we don't know anything about. So there's great potential to just step up and drill some holes that we know that are gonna be good, and that we are very confident are going to be good, and are very confident that we can drive toward a resource estimate very quickly. But that blue sky, big picture potential for something really big, I think, is also there as well. So now I'm just zooming in here and looking at a long section or a side view around that consolidated mine. And I've boxed out an area here below and beside the mine workings that's 500 meters by 200 meters, give or take. And in there's 8 drill holes that John Livermore drilled and got some really interesting high grade and wide results. So of these 8 holes, the average grade is about 500 grams per ton, and the average true thickness, we'll say, is in our interpretation, is between 9 and 10 meters. So, although we can't use these holes in a current and compliant 43101 resource because they're quote unquote historic and we can't really verify the data, what that means is we have to just drill this whole polygon at, say, an inferred level spacing of 50 meters between holes. And I think that our chances of coming up with a strong resource estimate when we do that are very, very good. So that's the first place we're going to concentrate on this year with drilling. But there's also some other interesting targets, one of them being the gold dust target. And again, a longitudinal style figure here on the bottom, where you've got, some levels where, the old timers tried to explore on veins and then some down here. But really the target area is below where they would have explored. And this is because, we have a very good understanding of where all of the silver and gold of this district came out of at other parts of it in terms of elevation. And that's between an elevation of 1,800 meters and 2,100 meters. Well, at that target elevation, we just don't have any exploration data there. So another, this is one example of many on this property that really haven't really been recognized, or have been recognized but haven't been explored yet. Okay, the property option terms on this, and we optioned this off of a company called Allegiant Gold, and they're concentrating in Nevada on some of the really lucrative open pit style gold mineralization, gold deposits that you can find there. So we're earning in the first phase is to earn in 75% with cash payments of $350,000, share payments on top of that, and then a pretty modest work commitment of $3 million. After we earn in the 75%, we have the option to purchase the other 25% as well, the remaining 25% for $3 million in shares and a little bit of cash at the end of the 3 years. Okay, so what are we up to here going forward? Well, like I was saying, we're still receiving assays and we're waiting on samples for about half of our program. But while we do that, of course, we're not just twiddling our thumbs. We're, basically moving ahead at full steam with planning for significant drill and exploration programs this year on both of these projects. We're gonna start drilling in mid to late March in Nevada, and then transition probably to New Mexico in the middle part of the year. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to just continuing to hunt high grade on both of these projects, and they're both things that hadn't really been significantly explored before. So that's it, and that's the opportunity really. Not to read all of these out, but really are focused on these famous high grade past producers that haven't seen the light of day, that haven't seen much exploration. Okay, well, thanks very much. Happy to take any questions, and of course our social media and contact info is all here, so please follow and share, and I'm always open to questions anytime, so please contact me anytime.
Thanks, Galen. Yeah, it was an interesting presentation, and I hadn't seen some of those maps before, so interesting to see kind of what else is in the works from more of a high level perspective. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll open it up to Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can enter them into the Q&A box below, or email me at tina@adcap.ca. I guess just talking about the Hughes property and the assays in the lab, do you have a sense on timing for that, or just kind of wait? I
always keep saying it'll be a couple more weeks. It'll be a couple more weeks. I feel like such a broken record. The last assay certificate I got back, the turnaround time was 97 days. And we were still dropping off samples right to the end of December. So, I'm starting to see some new results back the last few days. But I'll wait until we have, several holes back before releasing them. I won't just put them out one at a time. So, at the risk of ruining my credibility, I'm going to say a couple more weeks.
Okay. Yeah. And in terms of the depth that you've been drilling, it sounds like some of the targets are typically of 300 to 400 meter depths, but Ruby's a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that and how that's shaping out in terms of the more you go east, is it deeper, or have you just not explored some of those other targets like that?
Yeah, so like in the heart of the district, I would say the targets are at between 200 and 500 meters, or 200 and 400 meters. But yes, as you go east towards Ruby, they get a little bit deeper, and that we were hitting mineralization at Ruby and 500 meters down. But east of that, we just don't know. We just don't know if there's something else, something that brings it back up to surface. I will say that about a kilometer east of Ruby, we know that there's strong alteration right at surface, number one. And then number two, there was a hole drilled there that was actually drilled in the 80s that encountered, again, very, very strong, and what I would hope to be, or I might interpret to be, zone proximal, so close to mineralization style alteration. Over its entire length, and that hole was lost in alteration. So to be determined. It could go either way to the east.
So that surface alteration, like how much work have you done, I guess, at surface?
None so far. I've walked around there for a day. The geos have walked around there for a couple days each so far. They've just been so busy with drilling, where in the heart of the district. But what we're going to do is we're looking at IP. With geophysics, IP being one of them, and then geological mapping, I think is going to be very important for drill targeting, and then of course soil sampling as well. So layering our information towards towards targeting as efficiently as possible.
And in terms of the drilling that you've done so far, you've hit every target. What's the risk that you've seen, and have you hit according to your expectations? Or I know some of the drill results have obviously been fantastic. So was that in line with what we were expecting, or significantly higher? And how do you see that?
I was expecting to hit, but there's always that, that voice that, even after all the work you do, you don't really know, because exploration can be super humbling, right? Very humbling. So I'm really glad we hit, but what I'm really looking for, what we're really looking for is, in that Belmont mine, the Belmont vein, where the lion's share of that production came from, got to be like 15 meters wide, and we're drilling things now that are a meter wide, a couple meters wide, but we know that they can get to be 10, 15 meters wide at those grades. So I think, that's the type of thing that, we're onto something really interesting, and now it's just a matter of honing in on that, on that big vein, that Veta Madre, that big guy, And you can host a lot of ounces in a very small area in that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it seems like the Belmont vein is the largest vein currently. Do you think there are other larger width veins in the area, or yet to be determined?
I think there's an old saying, the best place to look for a new mine is right next to an old mine, and I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here by any means. So that's why I like, the eastern targets in that, we found the strong alteration. We found the zones of mineralization where they're narrow. So like the only remaining ingredient here is, okay, well, where do those blow out? Right. And then, that's when that's the big swing we're taking.
Right. It's interesting on the maps too. Like I hadn't really heard you talk about the tailings before. I think something new to some other investors as well. How much work have you done on the tailings so far, and how much work, I guess, is in the plan for this year?
Yeah, it's something we're working on in parallel with the exploration and the drilling. So we've done a lot of data compilation, number one. Number two, we've drilled a lot of, and I would say drill, I mean hand auger. One guy is kind of standing there and with an auger doing this, hand augering down to take samples. So we've done verification work on the work that was done in the 70s. We've flown it with high res photos to get volume estimates. So now it's just, I think, a matter of kind of putting it all together once we get all the assays back for it, which we don't have yet, and seeing what's there. Because when you've got something like, say, between 3 and 4 million silver equivalent ounces just sitting on surface in like a sand at $25, $30 silver, that demands attention. So I think the next steps there are taking a good look at the metallurgy and seeing what it'll take to start reprocessing that.
And the met work is in, that's part of the plan for 2021?
For sure.
You mentioned 3 to 4 million ounces. It seems like you're confident enough to put out that number. Is this something that could be realized, I guess, in the near term?
I wouldn't say near term, and medium term, 2021 term.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a sense of what kind of margins you could get on reprocessing tailings, or is it
I don't really know, but I look at a lot of similar operations, or even open pit silver mines, and the grades here are somewhere between 70 and 80 grams per ton silver equivalent. So to me, just on a conceptual level, that's again very interesting.
Yeah, for sure, and it's something that I don't think a lot of investors had already considered. And just talking about Nevada and Tonopah in general, we had a question emailed in about COVID, what the restrictions are and how things are operating in Tonopah currently.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's a concern corporately, personally. It's a significant concern. Nevada mining has been classified as an essential business. The mines are still operating. Everything is still operating. I wouldn't say it's business as usual, and it's something that you have to plan for and really mitigate, against that risk. But there's ways to do it that involve, using common sense and thinking, and then defining procedures to kind of make sure everyone operates the safest. And we work really closely with our drill contractors, and everyone's kind of takes it pretty seriously. So it's, it's not quite business as usual, but it's still business progressing.
And what about other activity in the area? Obviously, BlackRock is beside you. It seems like you're the only two in this immediate area. Are you seeing any players starting to look around? And are you yourselves looking at more land potentially?
Yeah, I'd say, in terms of high grade silver developers, around Tonopah, you've got BlackRock and us. There's a lot of gold mineralization around, the Nevada style gram per ton type stuff, for sure. Am I looking at more property? I'm always looking at opportunities. As a company, we've got two ways to grow, and that's through discovery or through M&A. So I'm always looking at other properties.
Okay, great. And yeah. Still around the area, or just in Nevada in general, or?
Yeah, I would say the U.S. in general. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And shifting over to New Mexico, it's a bit of a different deposit. It seems like there's some low-hanging fruit there. So I guess that's the strategy. You take some risks in certain areas, but this seems like you can easily build out a resource.
Yeah, and that's the goal. It's not kind of wildcat holes. It's following up where we think there's a really good chance where, or I should say where, a very well-known, renowned, famous geologist drilled holes and hit, we're following up on his work.
Okay, that's great. And then, and when is that expected to start?
I think we'll start that in, midsummer. I would like to kind of, transition from one project to the next. A little bit of a moving target, but I would expect that to happen midsummer.
Okay. And in terms of the drill program going forward, when would the market kind of have a better sense of what that will look like? I know you're in the middle of closing this financing, so
correct, yeah.
Shortly after that.
Exactly, yeah, shortly after that. And where I'm at right now is, I know how many meters we want to drill, and we generally know where the targets are going to be, but it's hard to finalize that and really pick the right targets before we have all the assays back. So it's a little bit of a game, and that, we need to finalize that because, I need to be most efficient with capital as possible and drill the best things first. But that being said, it'll probably be in the neighborhood of 10,000 to 15,000 meters on both projects this year.
We talked about a little bit of the backup at the assay labs, but it sounds like you have a plan going forward to help alleviate that. So maybe it would be helpful to talk about that a little bit as well.
Sure. So exactly. So before we started this, I was telling Tina that my last the turnaround certificate, I should say, that the turnaround time on that batch of samples was 97 days. And that's at one of the big assay laboratories, the biggest one in the world. We drop our samples off in Reno. We have samples being analyzed in Reno, Tucson, Arizona, Vancouver. Okay, that all makes sense. But also Zacatecas, Mexico, Hermosillo, Mexico, and Lima, Peru. So it's taking forever. They're sending samples all over, North and South America. So the alternatives are, and I'm hearing there's other labs where the turnaround times are much faster, that are more client focused. We're looking at other opportunities, put it that way, for our business.
All right, sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So as I mentioned, you're about to close this financing. You went out for $8 million. It was oversubscribed. There is a question from the audience about Sprott's holding and participation.
Yeah.
He's been involved for a little while. Can you just talk about how he got involved in the first place and why you think he's interested in continuing that involvement in the story?
Yeah, well, I can't put words in anyone's mouth. He decided to participate in the first financing going back to 25 cents. And then also in the second one, he invested $5 million in August. And then this one now, $2 million in this. So, end of the day, we're very glad to have him as a shareholder. Very glad that he's decided to continue to participate. And for me personally, and for us, that's something we take very, very, very seriously. So it kind of helps. I think it motivates us and the team to go out and make drill that big hole.
Yeah, and you talked about the team a little bit as well before. Obviously, a very geologically heavy team, which I think is important, obviously, for a mining project. But it's interesting to see so many kind of geologists involved in the story, and I think it gives a lot of credibility for yourself as well, and I think gives investors a little bit more confidence when looking at the assets and the drill programs.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel like I'm less and less of a geologist kind of every day that goes by.
Capital markets specialist now.
but anyways, if you kind of think about Tonopah, it's like this famous Wild West old district that we all learn about in school. And now, as a geo, you have the opportunity to kind of like make a new discovery here, or to extend the district and show that after 100 years, there's still a lot left. I mean, as a geo, that's like a pretty cool opportunity. So that's a lot of why I think people want to kind of work on it.
It's interesting when we're talking about our silver battle last week. We had yourself and BlackRock as the two finalists, both side by side in Tonopah. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the geology and jurisdiction checks off a lot of the boxes. I don't know. What do you think was really kind of the key there for having these two Tonopah focused assets in the finals?
I think you're right. It's number one, it's US. It's an easy story to really understand. It is for me, that's why I'm doing this. because it doesn't take much to get it, right? So I think that probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we're coming up on the hour. So before we go, I'll let you kind of give the audience a couple highlights of why they should invest in Summa and some of the value drivers going forward for the year.
Sure. So I think, hey, like high grade silver exploration right beside historic mines in areas that have never been explored before. And lots of news going forward in that, we've got 2 aggressive drill programs planned this year. We're just closing up a significant financing that's going to kind of allow us to really get serious about that. So, hey, stay tuned going forward in 2021. And
yeah, assays to come. I'm excited to see what's coming out of the lab.
Me too.
So, thanks, Galen, for participating, and thank you everyone for watching today. I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of 2020 holds, and congratulations on winning the silver battle and about to close this financing.